It was supposed to be just another holiday gathering at my parents' lakeside home. Prime rib roasting in the oven, my father's special mulled wine simmering on the stove, and the persistent sound of my sister's laughter bouncing off the walls. The kind of evening where the food smells inviting, but the family dynamics leave a bitter aftertaste. I'd almost canceled. The fourth quarter projections needed reviewing, and we were finalizing an acquisition that had consumed my waking hours for months. But my mother's guilt trips had a way of overriding even my most rational excuses. "Diana, you've missed the last 3 family dinners. Your work will still be there tomorrow." So here I was, helping arrange sterling silver forks that hadn't seen the light of day since last Christmas, wondering how early I could politely leave. My sister Vanessa arrived fashionably late, as always. 2 hours after I'd shown up to help cook, set the table, and listen to my mother's thinly veiled disappointment about my lack of a love life. "Your sister always makes time for dating," she'd said while chopping carrots, even with her busy schedule at the boutique. The boutique being the small clothing store my parents had helped Vanessa open after her 3rd career change in 5 years. I was in the kitchen uncorking another bottle of wine when the doorbell rang. Vanessa practically sprinted to answer it, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with unusual urgency. From where I stood, I could hear the murmur of voices, a man's low laugh mingling with Vanessa's theatrical giggle, the one she reserved for flirting and impressing our relatives. "Everyone," she announced, returning to the dining room with a dramatic flourish. "I want you to meet someone special." I stepped back into the dining room, wine bottle in hand, and froze. There, he was. James. My James. Or at least, he had been mine just 3 months ago. "This is my boyfriend, James," Vanessa declared, looping her arm through his with unmistakable possessiveness. "We've been seeing each other for a while now." For a moment, I thought I might be hallucinating. The stress, the lack of sleep, the glass of wine I'd had on an empty stomach. Surely this was some bizarre, stress-induced vision. But no. The man standing in my parents' dining room was undeniably James Ellis. The same James who had held my hand across restaurant tables for nearly a year. The same James who had whispered promises against my skin on lazy Sunday mornings. The same James who had told me with practiced sincerity that he needed space because my work schedule was too demanding and he deserved someone more present. My mother gasped with delight. My father raised his glass in approval. My younger brother Travis whistled low and appreciative. And I just stood there, wine bottle still clutched in my hand, watching as the man I'd dated for nearly a year smiled politely at my family. A family he'd never met during our relationship because I'd been too busy building my company to arrange a proper introduction. "Nice to meet you all," James said, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. The recognition was immediate, his smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before recovering with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to awkward situations. "Oh, hi," he managed weakly. Vanessa turned to me, her smile sharper than the knife I'd been using to carve the roast. "Isn't he perfect, Diana? I've been dying for you to meet him." I didn't react immediately. I wasn't sure I could trust my voice. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thinner as the implications settled in. James, the man who'd told me he needed a partner who prioritized relationship over career, was now dating my sister. The sister who'd always needed to have whatever I had, from my favorite childhood toys to the prom date I'd mentioned. "Finding cute." "Yes," I said finally, my voice remarkably steady as I set the wine bottle down with deliberate care. What a small world. My mother, ever oblivious to tension that might disrupt her perfect family narrative, clapped her hands together. "Well, let's all sit down. The food's getting cold. James, please sit next to Vanessa. Travis, scoot over and make room." What followed was the most excruciating dinner of my life. Vanessa dominated the conversation, spinning the tale of how she and James had accidentally bumped into each other at a coffee shop downtown, conveniently leaving out the fact that it was the same coffee shop where James and I had our daily morning ritual for months. A place I'd introduced him to because they carried his favorite Ethiopian roast. My parents ate it up, peppering James with questions about his veterinary practice, his hobbies, his family back in Colorado. James answered each question with the same earnest charm that had once captivated me, occasionally catching my eye across the table with looks that cycled between apologetic, defiant, and worried. James just got promoted to lead veterinarian at Westside Animal Hospital, Vanessa boasted, practically glowing as she placed her hand over his. He's practically running the place now. Tell them about the expansion plans, honey. Well, James shifted in his seat, straightening his posture with pride. We're actually being acquired by a larger healthcare group. It's going to mean better technology, more resources for treatment. I've been asked to oversee the transition for our location and implement the new systems. That's impressive, my father said, nodding approvingly. Moving up the corporate ladder. Good man. He'll probably be running the whole company soon, Vanessa added, shooting me a triumphant look. Something shifted inside me then. Not anger, not hurt. Something colder, more calculated. As I sat quietly sipping my wine, nodding at all the right moments listening to James talk about plans I knew better than he did, I wasn't planning revenge. I was remembering who I was. They didn't see it. They never did. My family never asked about my work, my little tech project, as my father dismissively called it. They didn't see the nights I'd stayed up coding until my vision blurred. The investor meetings where I'd fought tooth and nail for funding. The team I'd built from nothing to over 300 employees in just 4 years. They didn't ask because they didn't care to know that the hobby I was always busy with was actually Horizon Health Technologies, the fastest-growing veterinary software company in the country. The same company that had just acquired Westside Veterinary Group and its 5 satellite clinics 3 weeks ago, including James's workplace. I watched him brag about his promotion, about his plans to revolutionize the clinic's operations with technology that I had personally overseen the development of. I watched my sister hang on his every word, shooting triumphant glances my way whenever she thought I wasn't looking. I watched my parents nod approvingly, clearly impressed with Vanessa's catch, and I said nothing. I didn't correct them. I didn't reveal that the demanding job James had found so inconvenient was the one that now signed his paychecks. Instead, I listened, I smiled, I passed the potatoes when asked. Diana's still doing her computer thing, my mother said during a lull in the conversation, waving her hand dismissively. Always on that laptop. No wonder she can't keep a relationship going. My father chuckled. Maybe you could hire Diana to build you a website, James. Give her some real work for a change. Vanessa nearly choked on her wine, trying to stifle her laugh. James, to his credit, looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting nervously to mine. Actually, I said quietly, setting down my glass, I'm quite busy with work these days. We just completed a major acquisition. Oh, honey, my mother sighed. Don't bore everyone with computer talk. James was just telling us about saving that little puppy with the heart condition. The conversation moved on, as it always did, flowing, around me like I was a rock in the stream, present but inconsequential. By dessert, Vanessa was showing off the expensive watch James had given her for their 1-month anniversary. My mother was practically planning their wedding. My father was offering James his membership at the golf club. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment of peace. In the hallway, I checked my email out of habit. 5 urgent messages from the integration team working on the west side. Acquisition, all requiring my approval as CEO. I handled them efficiently, as I always did, replying with clear directives and signing off with my usual. Diana Reeves, Chief Executive Officer, Horizon Health Technologies. As I stared at my reflection, in the bathroom mirror I barely recognized myself. On the outside, I was the same Diana. Hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, minimal makeup, the simple black dress I'd worn to countless business dinners. But inside, something fundamental had changed. For years, I'd compartmentalized my life. Brilliant, respected CEO in the boardroom, overlooked, underestimated daughter at home. I'd accepted my family's dismissal of my achievements because fighting it seemed pointless, exhausting. But watching James and my sister perform their little charade, watching my family fawn over the very man who'd rejected me for being too ambitious, it crystallized something I'd long suspected. My family didn't just fail to see my success, they actively preferred not to acknowledge it. My achievements threatened the comfortable narrative they'd created. Vanessa was the pretty, social one who deserved attention. I was the serious, work-obsessed one who didn't need it. I returned to the table just as my father was pouring more wine. "To James and Vanessa," he toasted, raising his glass. "May this be the beginning of something wonderful." Everyone clinked glasses. Even me. But as I sipped my wine, I made a decision. Not out of malice, not out of jealousy, but out of something like self-respect. It was time to stop shrinking myself to fit the box my family had built for me. It was time to be CEO Diana Reeves at this table, not just in the boardroom. The evening wore on. Vanessa convinced James to play the piano, something he'd never done for me despite my encouragement. My parents applauded like he was a concert. Pianist rather than someone stumbling through Fur-Elise. My sister sat beside him on the bench, her hand on his thigh, her eyes periodically finding mine to ensure I was watching her victory lap. I was watching, but not in the way she thought. I was observing the dynamic with new clarity. This wasn't just about James. It never had been. This was about Vanessa needing to prove she could take what was mine, and my family's eagerness to celebrate her for it. "James is so cultured," my mother swooned, as if pressing the same 3 keys repeatedly constituted musical genius. "Such a Renaissance man, a healer of animals and an artist." My brother Travis caught my eye from across the room and rolled his eyes slightly. At 25, he was the youngest and perhaps the only one who occasionally saw through our family's dysfunctional patterns. He'd sent me a text earlier. "This is weird, right? Isn't this the guy you were seeing?" I'd simply replied, "Yep." Some conversations weren't meant for family group chats. Around 9, my phone rang, the special ringtone I'd assigned to emergency business calls. I considered ignoring it, letting it go to voicemail as I usually did during these rare family gatherings. But something had fundamentally changed. I was done compartmentalizing, done diminishing myself. I answered despite my mother's disapproving glare. "Ms. Reeves, I'm sorry to bother you at this hour, but we have a situation with the West Side integration." The voice of my VP of Operations was tense. "I understand," I said calmly, aware of the eyes on me. "What's happening?" "The staff at the main clinic are pushing back on the new protocols. Their lead vet is particularly resistant." "A Dr. Ellis? He's telling staff to ignore our directives until he's had a chance to, quote, assess the competence of the new ownership." I looked directly at James as I replied, "Tell Dr. Ellis that I'll address his concerns personally at tomorrow's all-hands meeting. 9 a.m. sharp." I paused. "And remind him that while I value his expertise with animals, I expect all Horizon Health employees to follow proper channels for operational concerns." James's face drained of color. His fingers froze mid-note on the piano keys, producing a dissonant chord that hung in the air. Vanessa, still beaming, seemed not to notice the sudden tension. "Diana," my mother chided as I ended the call, "you know the rule about phones at family gatherings. Whatever computer emergency it is can surely wait until tomorrow." "Actually, it can't," I replied, slipping my phone into my purse. "That was my VP of Operations. We're integrating new clinics into our network, and there are some compliance issues." "Fascinating," my father said with zero interest, turning back to James. "Now, about that golf membership. I should probably head out soon anyway, I interrupted, standing up. I have an early meeting tomorrow with the leadership team at Westside Animal Hospital. We just acquired them. The silence that followed was delicious. James stared at the piano keys as if they might offer him an escape route. Vanessa's smile froze, then faltered as she looked between James and me. Wait, she said slowly, her voice climbing half an octave. Westside Animal Hospital? Isn't that where you work, honey? James cleared his throat. Yes, we just got the announcement last week. About the acquisition. My mother's brow furrowed in confusion. Diana, you didn't mention your company was buying animal hospitals. You never asked, I replied simply. Horizon Health Technologies specializes in veterinary software and clinic management. We've been expanding into direct ownership of practices to create an integrated care network. The Westside Group is our largest acquisition to date. 5 locations, 30 veterinarians, over 100 support staff. My father set down his whiskey glass. For the first time that evening, possibly for the first time in years, he was looking at me with something approaching genuine interest. You're buying veterinary clinics? How many employees do you have now? 327 as of this morning. 412 once the Westside integration is complete. I smoothed my dress, a motion that had become a habit, before board meetings. We raised $60 million in our Series C round last year. Valuation just crossed $500 million. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice shifting in my father's glass. Travis whispered something that sounded like, "Holy shit." My mother's hand had risen to cover her open mouth, but it was Vanessa and James I watched. My sister's expression had transformed from confusion to dawning horror. James looked like he might be ill. Vanessa started, then stopped. The company that bought James's clinic. You're the CEO? I founded Horizon 6 years ago, I confirmed. We started with software for appointment scheduling and medical records. Now we offer everything from clinic management systems to financing for equipment purchases. And yes, direct ownership of select practices that meet our standards. James finally found his voice, though it emerged strangled and thin. Diana, I had no idea. Your company. I never connected the dots. The acquisition paperwork just said Horizon Health. Why would you? It's not like you ever asked about my work. The words weren't bitter, just matter of fact. You were too busy explaining why my long hours were such a burden on our relationship. I didn't, James began, then fell silent under my level gaze. My father, ever the businessman when it suited him, had recovered his composure. $500 million? He repeated, sounding impressed despite himself. And you started this yourself? With 2 developers in a garage apartment. We bootstrapped for 18 months before our first round of funding, profitable for the last 9 quarters. The pride in my voice wasn't for him. It was for me, for the team I'd built, for every investor who'd been told they were crazy to back a female founder in a male-dominated industry. But you never said anything, my mother protested weakly. All those dinners when we asked about your work. I did. Every time you asked about my computer thing or my little project, I answered, you just weren't listening. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair. It's not your fault. I got used to being underestimated. It's almost an advantage in business negotiations. Vanessa's face had hardened into something between embarrassment and defiance. So what now? Are you going to fire James because of me? Because that would be incredibly petty. The question almost made me laugh. She still thought this was a catfight over a man, not the collision of my professional world with the family that had never bothered to understand it. Of course not, I replied, buttoning my coat. Dr. Ellis has an excellent reputation with patients and impressive clinical skills. Horizon needs talented veterinarians. What we don't need are employees who undermine integration protocols or bypass the chain of command. I turned to James, who had the good sense to look ashamed. The all-hands meeting tomorrow will outline our vision for Westside's future under Horizon. I expect you'll find our plans for expanded services and upgraded equipment align well with what you were hoping for. We're also introducing competitive benefits, including student loan assistance, something I believe you mentioned wanting during our relationship. I didn't know, he said quietly, about any of this, about what you were building. You never asked, I repeated, the simple truth of it hanging in the air. None of you did. I gathered my purse and keys, suddenly eager to escape the stifling air of the house that had never felt like it fully belonged to me. There was a strange liberation in finally being seen, even if it had taken this bizarre confluence of events to make it happen. Diana, wait, my father called as I headed for the door. We should talk about this. Your company, perhaps there, are synergies with some of my business connections. I could introduce you to some people. I paused, one hand on the doorknob. I appreciate the offer, Dad. But my network is quite extensive now. Our last funding round was oversubscribed by 40%. The Wall Street Journal ran a profile on us last quarter. I sent you the link. I smiled, not unkindly. But if you're interested in learning more about what I do, I'd be happy to have that conversation. Just not tonight. My mother hurried over, looking at me as if seeing a stranger. Honey, we had no idea you were so successful. You should have told us. I did, Mom. Many times. I gave her a brief hug. I'll call you tomorrow. It's been an enlightening evening. As I stepped into the cool night air, I heard the murmur of shocked voices behind me. Vanessa's high-pitched denials. James's stammered explanations, my parents' confused questions. But their voices faded as I walked to my car, replaced by the steady rhythm of my thoughts. For years, I'd struggled to reconcile the two halves of my identity, the overlooked daughter and the powerhouse CEO. I'd compartmentalized, accepting the painful reality that my family would never value my achievements the way strangers did. I'd shrunk myself at this dinner table more times than I could count, swallowing corrections when they mischaracterized my work, accepting their dismissals with practiced grace. But I was done shrinking, done pretending to be less to make others more comfortable, done accepting invisibility in the place where I should have been seen most clearly. As I started my car, my phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Westside All Hands, 9 a.m. I smiled to myself, imagining James's face when I walked into that meeting tomorrow. Not as his ex-girlfriend, not as Vanessa's overshadowed sister, but as the CEO he'd have to answer to. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about James. Not really. It was about finally stepping fully into who I'd become in every room I entered. No more compartments. No more shrinking. Just me, whole and unapologetic. I arrived at Westside Animal Hospital at precisely 8:30 the next morning, half an hour before the all-hands meeting was scheduled to begin. The clinic wouldn't open to patients until noon, giving us ample time for the integration kickoff. My executive team had flown in from across the country, our CFO from New York, CTO from Austin, and COO from Chicago, a sign of how important this acquisition was to our growth strategy. The clinic manager, a capable woman named Elaine, met me at the door, clipboard in hand and anxiety evident in her tight smile. Ms. Reeves, welcome to Westside. Everything's set up in the conference room as requested. Thank you, Elaine. And please, call me Diana. I handed her my coat. How's the staff feeling about the transition? She hesitated, professionalism warring with honesty. Mixed, to be frank. The technicians and front desk staff are excited about the new benefits package, but some of the veterinarians are concerned about corporate oversight. By some, you mean Dr. Ellis, I said, not bothering to phrase it as a question. Elaine's eyebrows rose slightly. You're familiar with our staff already? I make it a point to know the key players in any acquisition. I kept my tone neutral. Dr. Ellis has an impressive clinical record. His patient satisfaction scores are excellent. His leadership skills, however, might need some development. She nodded cautiously. He's very protective of how things are done here. Change isn't easy for everyone. Change rarely is, but it can be managed with the right approach. I checked my watch. Is everyone here? Almost. Dr. Ellis texted that he's running a few minutes late. Of course he was. The James I knew had never been punctual for anything except dinner reservations. During our relationship, I'd grown accustomed to receiving texts like, "Sorry, emergency surgery, be there in 30," or "Got held up with a case, order without me." I'd always been understanding. The life of a veterinarian wasn't predictable, and I respected his dedication to his patients. That's fine. We won't start without him. I entered the conference room where my executive team was reviewing presentation materials. "Morning, everyone. How are we feeling?" My CFO, Rachel, grinned. "Ready to make some veterinarians very happy or very nervous, depending on how attached they are to their paper records." "The software demo is ready to go," added my CTO, Michael. "I've simplified it based on feedback from the last clinic integration. Less jargon, more practical examples." I nodded appreciatively. "Perfect. Remember, this isn't just about technology, it's about culture integration. These are skilled professionals who care deeply about their patients. Our job is to show them how our systems support that mission, not replace their expertise." The door opened as clinic staff began filing in. I recognized most of them from their personnel files, the benefit of having a photographic memory for faces and an obsessive approach to preparation. I greeted each by name, asking targeted questions about their specialties or tenures, watching their surprise that the CEO of their new parent company would take such interest. At 8:57, the room had filled completely. Only one chair remained empty. The one reserved for the lead veterinarian. At 9:02, James finally arrived, slightly out of breath and clutching a coffee cup like a shield. He froze momentarily upon seeing me standing at the head of the conference table, then quickly composed himself and took the only remaining seat. "Thank you all for being here," I began, making eye contact with each person in the room. "I'm Diana Reeves, founder and CEO of Horizon Health Technologies. These are my colleagues, Rachel Chen, our CFO, Michael Okafor, our CTO, and David Martinez, our COO. We're here today not just as your new management team, but as partners in building something extraordinary together." For the next 20 minutes, I outlined our vision for Westside: expanded services, renovated facilities, cutting-edge equipment, and most importantly, a proprietary software system that would streamline everything from appointment booking to inventory management. I emphasized our commitment to veterinary autonomy in clinical decisions while introducing standardized protocols that had been proven to improve outcomes across our network. "The transition will take approximately 6 weeks, I explained, clicking to the next slide. "During this time, you'll receive comprehensive training on our systems. We've found that most staff achieve proficiency within 10 days, but our support team will remain on site for the full period to ensure everyone feels confident." I could feel James's eyes on me throughout the presentation. His expression cycled between disbelief, confusion, and something harder to define. Perhaps respect. Perhaps regret. "Now, I understand there are concerns," I continued, addressing the elephant in the room. "Change is challenging, especially when you've established successful workflows. I want to assure you that we're not here to disrupt what's working. We're here to enhance it." To demonstrate that commitment, we've analyzed Westside's operations and identified areas where your approaches actually outperform our standard protocols. This caught everyone's attention. It wasn't the typical corporate acquisition speech where the parent company assumes superiority in all things. "Dr. Ellis," I said, looking directly at James, "your emergency triage protocols are exceptionally efficient. Our data shows a 22% faster intervention time compared to our network average. We'd like to incorporate your methodology across all Horizon clinics, with appropriate attribution, of course. James straightened in his chair, clearly surprised. I appreciate that. The team and I have been refining those protocols for years. Excellence deserves recognition, I replied matter-of-factly. Horizon's strength comes from identifying and scaling best practices, regardless of where they originate. We're not here to replace your expertise. We're here to amplify it. The tension in the room noticeably decreased. Even the most skeptical, veterinarians seemed to relax slightly as I continued highlighting specific strengths unique to Westside that we plan to preserve or expand. When I opened the floor for questions, they came rapidly, concerned but constructive. Would they need to change their surgical suppliers? Only if they wanted access to our discounted pricing. Would they be required to push certain medications? Absolutely not. Clinical decisions remained with the veterinarians. Would their compensation structures change? Yes, but only upward. Our profit-sharing model had increased average veterinarian earnings by 18% across our network. Throughout the Q&A, James remained conspicuously silent, his expression unreadable. It wasn't until the formal meeting concluded and staff began dispersing that he approached me, coffee cup long empty but still clutched in his hand. "Diana, could I have a moment?" His voice was low, private. I glanced at my watch. "I have 10 minutes before my next meeting. Let's use your office." He led me down a hallway decorated with framed photos of staff with particularly memorable patients. Dogs in casts, cats wearing cones, even a parrot wearing a tiny splint. I recognized his office immediately, the framed Colorado medical license, the meticulously organized bookshelf arranged by veterinary specialty, the utterly spotless desk. James had always been fastidiously neat, a quality I'd once found endearing. He closed the door behind us, then seemed unsure where to stand, finally leaning awkwardly against his desk. "So, this is unexpected. Is it?" I remained standing, maintaining professional distance. "The acquisition has been in progress for months. The initial outreach to Westside's ownership group happened in February. You know that's not what I mean." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once knew intimately, one that signaled his discomfort. "Last night, at your parents' house, with Vanessa? I had no idea you were behind Horizon. Would it have mattered if you had known?" He flinched slightly. "Of course it would have. I wouldn't have dated my sister," I finished for him, keeping my voice clinical, detached. "Or you wouldn't have ended our relationship citing my demanding job as the reason." "Both," he admitted, looking genuinely pained. "Diana, what happened last night? It was mortifying. I felt like the biggest fool on the planet." I allowed myself a small, humorless smile. "I imagine finding out your ex-girlfriend is now effectively your boss would be uncomfortable." "It's not just that." He set the empty cup down, no longer needing the prop. "Watching you present that vision today, seeing what you've built, understanding the scale of it, I didn't know. When we were together, I knew you were working on some health tech startup, but I never grasped what that actually meant. You never asked," I said simply. "Not in any real way. When I tried to share my successes, closing a major funding round, signing a key client, you'd congratulate me and then change the subject. After a while, I stopped trying." His face registered genuine surprise. "I didn't realize. I thought I was being supportive by not adding work stress to our relationship time." "That wasn't your decision to make," I pointed out. "My work isn't just what I do. It's a fundamental part of who I am. You treated it like an inconvenience, something to be tolerated rather than celebrated." James was silent for a long moment, absorbing this. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "I owe you an apology. Several, actually. For not seeing what you were building. For resenting the time it took instead of understanding its importance. And for last night, bringing Vanessa to your family's home was inexcusable. Did you know she was my sister when you started dating her?" It was the one question I hadn't allowed myself to ask the previous night. No, he said quickly, emphatically. I met her at Summit Coffee. She approached me, said she was a client looking for a vet for her new puppy. We started talking, and it wasn't until our third date that she mentioned her last name. By then, he trailed off, looking embarrassed. By then what? You were too invested to stop dating her once you realized the connection? Sounds terrible, when you put it that way, he admitted. But Vanessa said you wouldn't mind, that you were too busy with work to care about who she dated, and I guess part of me wanted to, I don't know, prove something. To me? Or to yourself? I asked, genuinely curious now. He considered this, then sighed. Both, maybe. To show that I was moving on, that I was fine without you. It was immature and petty, and seeing you last night made me realize how ridiculous it all was. I checked my watch. My next meeting starts in 3 minutes. This has been enlightening, James, but ultimately irrelevant to our professional relationship. As I said yesterday, your clinical skills are valuable to Horizon. Your resistance to the integration process is not. I expect you to lead by example as we implement these changes. He straightened, shifting from ex-boyfriend back to employee. I understand. I'll fully support the transition. Good. I moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, my sister. Vanessa tends to lose interest in things once they no longer serve her purpose. Now that dating you no longer functions as a victory over me, I suspect her enthusiasm will wane rapidly. We already ended things, he said quietly. Last night, after you left, it became very clear that her interest in me had little to do with me as a person. I nodded, unsurprised. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for that part. Not everything should be a competition. Diana, he said as I opened the door. For the record, what you've built here is incredible. I was wrong about your work. I was wrong about a lot of things. I allowed myself a genuine smile then, not for him, but for the acknowledgement of what I'd accomplished. Yes, you were. Staff meeting is at 8:30 every Monday morning. Don't be late next time. The integration at Westside progressed smoothly over the next few weeks. James, true to his word, became an unexpected ally in the process, helping convince the more resistant staff members that our systems would ultimately improve patient care. I maintained strict professionalism in our interactions, cordial but distant, focused entirely on business objectives rather than our complicated personal history. My family was a different story. 3 days after the dinner, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail twice before finally answering on her third attempt. Diana, are you there? I've been trying to reach you for days. I've been busy, Mom. The Westside integration requires hands-on attention. I was in my office overlooking downtown, reviewing surgical equipment expenditure proposals. What can I help you with? There was a pause, then. Your father and I have been talking. We owe you an apology. I set down my pen, genuinely surprised. In 32 years, I could count on one hand the number of times either of my parents had apologized to me for anything. We had no idea about your company, she continued when I didn't immediately respond. All this time, we thought you were just working for someone else's startup or something. I told you I founded Horizon. Many times? Yes, but, she hesitated. We didn't understand what that meant. Your father looked up articles about you online, the Forbes profile from last year, the feature in Business Insider. Why didn't you make sure we knew? I closed my eyes, suppressing a sigh. It wasn't my responsibility to make you understand the significance of my work, Mom. I shared my successes. You and Dad chose not to engage with them. That's not fair, she protested weakly. We've always supported your career. You've tolerated it, I corrected. There's a difference. When Vanessa opened her boutique, you and Dad attended the grand opening, brought champagne, invited all your friends. When I closed our Series A funding, $5 million that kept Horizon alive. I mentioned it at Sunday dinner, and Dad changed the subject to Travis's golf tournament. Another long pause. I never realized. We never meant to make you feel less important. I know you didn't. That's not why I'm bringing it up. I softened my tone, recognizing her genuine remorse. I don't need retroactive celebration, Mom. I just need you to understand why I've kept my professional life separate from my family life. It was easier than constantly feeling invisible. Your father wants to have you over for dinner. Just you, to talk about the company. He's very impressed with what you've built. Of course he was. My father had always respected financial success above all else. Now that he understood Horizon's valuation, I'd suddenly become interesting. I appreciate the invitation, but I'm traveling. For the next 2 weeks, Tokyo and Singapore, we're expanding into the Asian market. Oh, she sounded deflated. Well, when you get back then. I relented slightly. I'll check my calendar. But Mom, I need you to understand something. I'm not suddenly a different person because you now know about my success. I'm the same Diana I've always been. If we're going to rebuild our relationship, it needs to be based on who I am, not what I've achieved. Of course, honey. We just want to get to know you better. After hanging up, I sat for a long moment, staring at the skyline. Through my office windows, the conversation had been unexpected. Not unpleasant exactly, but disorienting. For years, I'd compartmentalized my family relationships and my professional identity. Now those worlds had collided, and I was still adjusting to the new landscape. My assistant knocked lightly on the open door. Sorry to interrupt, but your sister is here. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's rather insistent. I barely had time to respond before Vanessa pushed past him into my office, looking dramatically out of place among the minimalist furnishings in her bright floral dress and oversized sunglasses. So this is where the magic happens, she declared, spinning slowly to take in the view. Nice corner office, sis. Very impressive. Vanessa. This is unexpected. I nodded to my assistant. It's fine, Mark. Please hold my calls. Once we were alone, Vanessa dropped into the chair opposite my desk, finally removing her sunglasses. Her eyes were slightly puffy. She'd been crying recently. James broke up with me, she announced without preamble. I'm aware, I replied neutrally. Of course you are, she laughed without humor. He works for you now. Do you know what he said? That dating me was inappropriate given the circumstances. The circumstances being that I'm his boss's sister and his ex-girlfriend's sister. Talk about complicated. I remained silent, waiting for her to reach her point. I didn't know he was your ex, she finally said, her voice smaller. Not at first, anyway. He was just this cute vet who kept flirting with me at the coffee shop. When did you figure it out? She had the grace to look embarrassed. After our second date. He mentioned dating someone who worked crazy hours at a tech company. The timing lined up with when you were seeing someone last year. And you continued dating him. Vanessa shrugged, a gesture that managed to be both defensive and apologetic. It seemed like karma or something. You always get everything. The brains, the drive, the successful career. For once, I had something you wanted and couldn't have. I didn't want James, I said quietly. We broke up because we weren't right for each other. He needed someone who would prioritize his needs above their own ambitions. That wasn't me. Still, she insisted, you have to admit it's a little funny. All this time competing with you, and I didn't even realize what I was up against. She gestured around the opulent office. CEO of a $500 million company? How am I supposed to compete with that? It was never a competition, Vanessa. That's what you never understood. She studied me for a moment, then sighed heavily. Maybe, not for you. It always was for me. The pretty sister versus the smart sister. Guess which role I got cast in? For the first time, I considered how our family's dynamics had affected Vanessa. While I'd been dismissed and overlooked, she'd been reduced to her appearance and social skills, praised for her beauty and charm, but never expected to achieve anything substantive. Different sides of the same limiting coin. We don't have to keep playing those roles, I said. We're adults now. We get to decide who we want to be. Easy for you to say. You've clearly figured it out. She stood, smoothing her dress. Anyway, I didn't come here to get all deep and meaningful. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. About James. About not taking your work seriously. About a lot of things, really. It wasn't a perfect apology, but from Vanessa, it was unprecedented. Thank you. That means more than you might think. She nodded, retrieving her sunglasses. So, lunch sometime? When you're not too busy revolutionizing veterinary care or whatever? I smiled, surprising myself. I'd like that. 6 months passed, in a whirlwind of expansion and recalibration, both professional and personal. Horizon completed the West Side integration ahead of schedule, largely due to James's unexpected effectiveness as a liaison between corporate management and clinical staff. He'd found his professional stride in the new structure, leveraging his veterinary expertise while developing previously untapped leadership skills. My relationship with my family evolved more gradually. The dinner my father had requested finally happened a month after my return from Asia. I arrived at my parents' house on a Sunday evening, this time dressed intentionally in what I thought of as my investor meeting outfit, a tailored navy suit that projected competence without trying too hard. My father met me at the door, handshake ready as if greeting a business associate rather than his daughter. Diana, right on time. Come in, come in. I've opened a bottle of that Barolo you sent over. Excellent choice, by the way. The bottle had been a peace offering of sorts, delivered after our tentative phone reconciliation. I'd selected it carefully, expensive enough to signal respect, for his wine knowledge, but not so extravagant as to seem like I was buying forgiveness. The Japanese expansion went well? He asked as he led me to the dining room, where place settings for just the three of us had been arranged with uncharacteristic formality. Better than projected. We're looking at a 30% increase in Q4 revenue from the new partnerships. He nodded appreciatively, pulling out my chair with newfound deference. Your mother's making that salmon you like. Should be ready any minute. The evening progressed with an odd rhythm, my father asking detailed questions about Horizon's business model, my mother interjecting with hesitant personal inquiries, both of them listening with an intensity that felt foreign after years of polite disinterest. So this veterinary software? My father said, refilling my wine glass. You developed it yourself? From scratch? The initial version, yes. I coded the prototype while working at Meridian Health. When it became clear there was significant market potential, I brought on a development team to scale it properly. That's remarkable. He looked genuinely impressed. And the clinics you're acquiring, what's the strategy there? Vertical integration? Partly, I explained, warming to the topic despite my initial reservations. It's also about creating proving grounds for new technologies. When we develop new features, we can implement them in our owned clinics first, gather data, refine the approach, and then roll out to our software clients with proven results. For the first time in my adult life, I watched my father take notes on something I said, jotting down points in the small moleskin he always carried. My mother, meanwhile, studied me with a mixture of pride and bewilderment, as if seeing a stranger wearing her daughter's face. The Forbes article mentioned you turned down an acquisition offer last year, my father continued. From Stellaris. Health? That must have been substantial. 300 million, I confirmed. But their vision didn't align with ours. They wanted to dismantle the clinic ownership model and focus solely on software licensing. My mother made a small gasping sound. You turned down $300 million? It wasn't the right move for Horizon, I said simply. Our integrated approach is what differentiates us in the market. The board backed my decision unanimously. My father set down his fork, studying me with new eyes. You know, Diana, I've spent 30 years in business thinking I understood what it takes to succeed. Watching you now, hearing how you talk about your company, I realize I had a lot of blind spots. What do you mean? I mean, I underestimated what you were building, what you're capable of. He glanced at my mother, who nodded encouragingly. We both did, and I'm sorry for that. The apology hung in the air between us, simple but profound. I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. I didn't build Horizon to prove anything to you, I said finally. I built it because I saw a need in the market that no one was addressing properly. Because I believed in the vision. Your approval wasn't the goal. I understand that now, he replied, surprising me with his earnestness. And that's precisely what makes it so impressive. You did this entirely on your own terms. The conversation shifted then, moving beyond business metrics to more personal territory. Tentative questions about my life outside work, genuine interest in my upcoming plans. By dessert, something had fundamentally changed in our family dynamic. Not healed exactly, but realigned into something with potential for growth. My relationship with Vanessa transformed more dramatically. The lunch we'd planned evolved into a standing monthly sister date, sometimes at trendy restaurants, occasionally at my office when schedules were tight. The competitive undercurrent that had defined our relationship since childhood gradually dissolved, replaced by something approaching mutual respect. I've been thinking about going back to school, she announced during one of our lunches, pushing salad around her plate nervously. Maybe finish that business degree I started before the boutique. Really? That's great, Van. I meant it sincerely. Any particular focus in mind? She hesitated. Actually, I was thinking about healthcare, administration. Not the medical side. God knows I'd be terrible at that. But the business operations part. She looked up, gauging my reaction. I know it's probably stupid, but seeing what you've built with Horizon, it made me realize there are ways to work in healthcare without being a doctor or nurse. It's not stupid at all, I assured her. Healthcare, administration is a growing field with serious career potential. The industry needs people who understand both the business and human elements. Would you? She took a deep breath. Would you help me? Not financially, I've got savings from selling the boutique. But maybe advice? Connections? I don't even know what I don't know. The request was unprecedented. Vanessa had never asked for my professional guidance before, had never acknowledged that I might have wisdom worth sharing. Of course I will, I said without hesitation. Horizon partners with several university programs for internships. I could make some introductions once you're enrolled. Her smile was genuinely grateful, without the competitive edge I'd grown accustomed to seeing. That would be amazing. Thank you. She paused, then added with unexpected vulnerability. I'm proud of you, you know. What you've built. Who you've become. I should have said that a long time ago. As for James, our professional, relationship settled into something respectfully collaborative. He excelled at translating our corporate objectives into language that resonated with clinical staff, eventually earning a promotion to regional medical director. Our personal history faded into background context, not forgotten, but no longer defining our interactions. 6 months after the fateful family dinner, he stopped by my office before a leadership retreat, professional folder in hand, but hesitation in his stance. Diana, do you have a minute? I wanted to run the Q2 clinical metrics presentation by you before the executive meeting. Of course. Come in. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same one Vanessa had dramatically occupied half a year earlier. As he outlined his presentation plans, I found myself appreciating the irony of our reversed positions. Once, he'd been the established professional while I worked tirelessly on my demanding job that he couldn't understand. Now, he was learning to navigate the corporate world I had mastered long ago. The implementation has gone better than I expected, he admitted, closing his folder. I was wrong about corporate medicine, at least about your version of it. High praise, I said with a small smile. I'll be sure to quote you in our next investor presentation. He laughed, the sound surprisingly comfortable between us. You know, sometimes I think about that family dinner. How differently everything could have gone if I'd bothered to ask what you actually did for a living when we were dating. We can't change the past, I replied, straightening papers on my desk. But we're both where we need to be now. He nodded, accepting the gentle finality in my tone. As he reached the door, he turned back briefly. For what it's worth, I'm glad things worked out this way. Not the embarrassing parts, obviously, but this. Working with you, being part of what you're building. It's inspiring. After he left, I stood by my office window, watching the cityscape that had become so familiar. In the reflection of the glass, I saw not just the skyline, but my own image. Confident, self-possessed, no longer diminished by anyone's limited perception. The journey from that family dinner to this moment hadn't been about revenge or vindication. It had been about recalibration, of family dynamics, of professional relationships, and most importantly, of how I presented myself to the world. No more compartmentalizing, no more shrinking, no more accepting invisibility in spaces where I deserved to be seen. 1 year to the day after that transformative family dinner, I found myself once again preparing for a gathering at my parents' lakeside home. This time, however, was markedly different. My mother had consulted me on the menu, incorporating dishes I actually enjoyed. My father had scheduled the event around my availability rather than assuming I would adjust my calendar to fit theirs. And perhaps most significantly, I had helped plan it. The caterers will be there at 5, I confirmed, phone pressed between ear and shoulder as I reviewed quarterly projections in my office. And the AV setup is taken care of. Are you sure we need such an elaborate presentation? My mother asked, anxiety threading her voice. It's just family, after all. It's not elaborate, Mom. Just a simple slide deck and champagne toast. Dad specifically requested something befitting the milestone. I couldn't help but smile at how thoroughly my father had embraced his newfound appreciation for corporate traditions. Tonight was officially a celebration of Horizon's successful IPO, which had occurred 3 weeks earlier. The offering had exceeded even our most optimistic projections, valuing the company at just over $2.1 billion, and making me, at 33, one of the youngest female CEOs of a publicly traded healthcare technology company. Your sister's bringing someone, my mother added, too casually to be genuinely casual. A professor from her program. He seems very nice. That's great. I meant it sincerely. Vanessa had thrown herself into her healthcare administration studies with unexpected dedication over the past year. Her bringing an academic colleague to a family event suggested her priorities had shifted from dramatic romantic entanglements to professional connections, a development I considered heartening. And what about you, dear? Anyone special joining you tonight? I suppressed a sigh. Some aspects of family dynamics never changed, no matter how many billions your company might be worth. Just me, Mom. The IPO hasn't left much time for dating, which wasn't entirely true. I'd been seeing someone, cautiously, privately, for the past 3 months. A venture capitalist I'd met at a healthcare innovation summit who understood my schedule because his was equally demanding. But our relationship was too new, too tentative to introduce to the complex ecosystem of my family. Well, I invited Dr. Carson from the hospital board. His son just moved back to town after finishing his surgical residency. Very handsome, very accomplished. Mom, I kept my tone light but firm. I'm not interested in being set up. Tonight is about celebrating Horizon, not finding me a date. She made a small sound of disappointment, but didn't press further, another sign of our evolving relationship. A year ago, she would have insisted, dismissing my objections as unnecessary career focus. Now, she respected my boundaries, even when she didn't fully understand them. That evening, I arrived at my parents' house precisely on time, bearing an appropriately expensive bottle of champagne and wearing a dress I'd chosen specifically for the occasion, emerald green, structured but not severe, projecting confidence without intimidation. Travis opened the door, greeting me with an exaggerated bow. The woman of the hour, or should I say, the billionaire of the hour. Paper wealth, I corrected him with a smile, accepting his hug. And technically, I own less than 20% of those billions. Only a few $100 million then, practically destitute. He relieved me of the champagne, examining the label with approval. Dad's in full proud father mode tonight. Fair warning, he's shown your CNBC interview to literally everyone who's arrived so far. I laughed, allowing myself to enjoy the novelty of parental pride. Better than last year when he barely knew what Horizon did. True that. Travis lowered his voice. James is here, by the way, as Westside's executive representative or something. Dad invited him. I nodded, unsurprised. James's role as regional medical director made him the logical choice to represent Westside Veterinary Group at corporate events. In the year since our professional relationship had begun, we'd developed a working rapport based on mutual respect. The awkwardness of our personal history had gradually faded into the background, overshadowed by successful collaboration. That's fine, I assured Travis. It's been a year. Ancient history. Inside, the house had been transformed. My father, embracing his new role as champion of my success, had created something between a family dinner and a corporate celebration. Tasteful banners displaying Horizon's logo decorated the living room. A modest podium had been set up for speeches. Waitstaff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. On a screen near the fireplace, financial news coverage of Horizon's IPO played on silent loop. My mother rushed over, elegant in a new dress that suggested she'd put particular effort into her appearance tonight. Diana, you look wonderful. Come, everyone's waiting to congratulate you. The next half hour passed in a whirl of greetings and congratulations. Extended family members who'd previously shown minimal interest in my career now approached with enthusiastic questions about stock options and expansion plans. My father's golf friends sought investment advice. Even my childhood piano teacher had been invited and wanted to hear about this amazing computer company I'd built. Throughout it all, I caught glimpses of how thoroughly my position within the family had shifted. My parents introduced me with unmistakable pride, emphasizing my accomplishments in ways they'd never bothered to learn before. Vanessa, engaged in animated conversation with a distinguished older man I assumed was her professor, periodically, caught my eye and raised her glass in genuine celebration of my success. And then there was James, standing somewhat apart from the main gathering, nursing a scotch and observing the proceedings with a thoughtful expression. When our eyes met, across the room he offered a small acknowledging nod, not the wounded look of an ex, nor the deferential posture of an employee, but the simple recognition of two people with shared history who had found their appropriate places in each other's lives. My father clinked his glass for attention as the caterers began serving dinner. Before we eat, I'd like to say a few words about why we're gathered here tonight. The room quieted as he took his place behind the small podium, uncharacteristically nervous. In all my years, I'd rarely seen my father anything less than completely self-assured. 1 year ago, he began, we had a very different family dinner in this house, one that didn't go particularly well. A murmur of uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. That night revealed something important to me, not just about my daughter's professional success, which is remarkable by any standard, but about my own failure to see what was right in front of me. I felt a tightness in my throat, unprepared for the emotional turn. Diana, he continued, looking directly at me, for years you tried to share your vision with us, and we weren't listening. Not really. We saw what we expected to see, our serious, dedicated daughter with her computer project, instead of the innovative leader you had become. My mother wiped at her eyes discreetly. Vanessa reached over and squeezed my hand. Tonight is officially about celebrating Horizon's extraordinary public offering, my father said, raising his glass. But for me, it's about celebrating something more important, the remarkable woman who created it all, who never gave up, even when her own family underestimated her, who built something revolutionary while we were busy looking elsewhere. The room raised their glasses in unison. To Diana, my father concluded, his voice thick with emotion. Who taught me that sometimes the most extraordinary things are happening right under our noses, if only we have the wisdom to pay attention? As applause filled the room, I felt the final pieces of a long, incomplete puzzle falling into place. The recognition I'd once craved from my family now felt less like validation and more like the natural conclusion of a journey I'd begun long ago. Not for their approval, but for my own fulfillment. Later, as guests mingled over dessert, James approached me on the lakeside patio where I'd stepped out for a moment of quiet reflection. "Congratulations," he said, joining me at the railing. "Quite a different scene from last year." "Quite," I smiled, feeling no lingering discomfort in his presence. "Thank you for coming. The Westside integration numbers were highlighted in our IPO presentation, you know. Your team's performance exceeded projections in every quarter." I saw that, though I think the credit goes more to your systems than my leadership. "It's both," I corrected him. "Good systems fail without good people implementing them." We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching moonlight ripple across the lake surface. "I've been meaning to tell you," he said finally. "I'm relocating to our Seattle office next month. They need an experienced director to oversee the Pacific Northwest expansion." "I know. I approved the transfer request." At his surprised look, I added, "I'm still the CEO, James. Executive staffing decisions cross my desk." "Right." He laughed softly. "I sometimes forget how much you see from that corner office." "Everything," I confirmed with a small smile. "That's the job." As we turned to rejoin the party, he paused. "You know, a year ago, I thought losing you was the worst thing that could happen to my career. Turns out it was the best thing that happened to both of us." I considered this as we walked back toward the warm light of the house, where my family, my truly seeing, finally understanding family, waited to continue celebrating not just what I'd built, but who I'd become. "You might be right about that," I acknowledged. "Sometimes the end of one chapter is exactly what we need to write a better story." 18 months after Horizon's IPO, I found myself in an unexpected position, taking an actual vacation. Not a working trip disguised as time off, not a strategic retreat with my executive team, but a genuine break. 2 weeks in a secluded villa on the Amalfi Coast, disconnected from quarterly projections and integration timelines. It had been my mother's suggestion, surprisingly enough. "You've built an empire, Diana. Now you need to enjoy it a little." Coming from the woman who had once criticized my work ethic as excessive, the advice carried a particular weight, an acknowledgement that my dedication had been worthwhile after all. On my third morning in Italy, I sat on the terrace overlooking the Mediterranean, coffee in hand, watching sailboats trace white paths across the azure water. My phone remained inside, temporarily freed from its role as my constant companion. The stillness felt foreign, but increasingly welcome. The past year and a half had brought changes I couldn't have anticipated. Horizon continued its expansion, now with operations in 12 countries, and a valuation that had nearly doubled since the IPO. My executive team had evolved into a well-oiled machine that could function without my constant oversight. a development that both satisfied my leadership goals and occasionally challenged my control tendencies. My family dynamic had transformed even more dramatically. My father had shifted from dismissive to almost reverential about my career, sometimes overcompensating in his enthusiasm. "Have you read my daughter's profile in Business Insider?" became his standard introduction when meeting anyone new. My mother, meanwhile, had stopped trying to set me up with eligible bachelors and instead began asking thoughtful questions about Horizon's healthcare initiatives. Perhaps most surprisingly, Vanessa had completed her healthcare administration degree and accepted a position at a hospital system in Chicago, deliberately choosing a city where she wouldn't be in my shadow. "I need to see if I can do this on my own," she'd explained during our monthly sister lunch before her move. Without the Reeves name opening doors for me, I'd respected her decision, recognizing it as the kind of independence I'd sought in my own career. The villa's housekeeper appeared with a fresh pot of coffee and a small envelope. "Special delivery from the village, Ms. Reeves. A gentleman." Brought it to the gate. Curious, I opened the envelope to find a handwritten note on thick cream stationery. "Diana, forgive the intrusion on your well-deserved break. I'm in Positano for the European Veterinary Conference and heard through the hospital grapevine that you might be nearby. If you're interested in catching up with an old colleague, I'll be at Cafe Marini this afternoon around 4. No business. Talk permitted." James, I smiled despite myself. Of all the coastal towns in all of Italy, James Ellis had turned up just miles from my secluded retreat. The coincidence seemed either cosmically orchestrated or suspiciously convenient. After a moment's consideration, I texted my assistant back in New York. "Can you confirm if Westside sent anyone to the European Veterinary Conference in Positano? Thiaghi?" Response came quickly. "Checking. Yes, Dr. Ellis is leading a panel on our integrated care model. It was on the approved travel list you signed last month, so it wasn't a fabricated excuse. James really was here for work, and I really had approved the trip without connecting the geographic dots. The question remained whether I wanted to interrupt. My carefully crafted solitude for coffee with my ex-boyfriend turned employee. By 3:30, curiosity won out. I dressed casually but carefully, linen pants and a silk blouse that projected relaxed confidence without trying too hard, and had the villa's driver take me into Positano. Cafe Marini occupied a picturesque corner overlooking the harbor, with terraced seating cascading down toward the water. James was already there, reading a medical journal at a table set slightly apart from the other patrons. He looked different somehow, more at ease in his own skin, his posture lacking the nervous energy I remembered from our relationship days. He stood when he saw me approach, offering a warm but professional smile. "Diana, I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I admitted, taking the seat across from him. But 18 months of solid work post-IPO has left me with limited social skills and a dangerous coffee addiction. This seemed like an opportunity to address both. He laughed, the sound easier than I remembered. "How's the vacation treating you? Any withdrawal symptoms from being away from your empire?" Fewer than expected. It turns out building a strong executive team has its benefits. I studied him over the rim of my coffee cup once the waiter had delivered our order. "The Seattle relocation must have gone well. The Pacific Northwest expansion numbers are impressive." "I thought we agreed no business talk," he reminded me. "Gently, force of habit. Let's try again." I set down my cup. "How's Seattle treating you, James? Beyond the professional aspects?" "I like it. The rain takes some adjustment after California sunshine, but there's something appealing about the landscape, all those evergreens and water views. I bought a small house on Bainbridge Island. Ferry commute to the city each day. It's peaceful." "Sounds lovely." I meant it sincerely. There was something gratifying about seeing him settled and content, our complicated history notwithstanding. "And you?" "All I know is what I read in the business press. Veterinary tech visionary Diana Reeves revolutionizes animal health care. He mimicked a headline with his hands. But that doesn't tell me much about how you're actually doing. I considered the question, realizing it had been some time since anyone had asked about me rather than Horizon. I'm recalibrating, learning that success creates its own challenges. The company has grown beyond what I initially envisioned, which is thrilling but occasionally overwhelming. And outside of work? He asked carefully, respecting but gently pushing past the professional boundaries I typically maintained. There's been less outside of work than I'd like, I acknowledged. Hence this enforced vacation. My mother's idea, surprisingly enough. How are things with your family? Better than at our memorable dinner, I hope. I smiled at the understatement. Transformed, actually. My father now introduces me as my daughter the CEO, rather than just my daughter. My mother has stopped sending me articles about freezing my eggs and started sending business profiles of women entrepreneurs instead. And Vanessa? He asked, the slightest hesitation in his voice. Thriving in Chicago, healthcare administration at Northwestern Memorial. She's dating one of the hospital's neurologists. Very seriously, according to my mother. Good for her. He seemed genuinely pleased. It's nice to hear everyone found their path. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily after that, skipping between travel recommendations, books we'd enjoyed, changes in veterinary practice. No lingering tension, no awkward references to our past relationship. Just two professionals, with shared history enjoying Italian coffee on a perfect Mediterranean afternoon. As the sun began its descent toward the water, casting golden light across the harbor, James checked his watch reluctantly. I should head back. Early panel tomorrow. Of course. Thank you for the coffee. It was unexpectedly pleasant. He smiled at my characteristic frankness. High praise indeed. Maybe we could do it again sometime, when we're both back stateside? I found myself nodding before fully analyzing the implications. I'd like that. As we stood to leave, he hesitated. I've been meaning to tell you something. That night at your parents', when I realized you were my new CEO, it was mortifying in the moment, but ultimately the best thing that could have happened. Because it advanced your career? I asked, curious about his perspective. Partly, yes. But more because it forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself. He met my gaze directly. I ended our relationship claiming your ambition was the problem, when really I was intimidated by it. Working under your leadership these past 2 years has been educational. You've built something remarkable, Diana, something I couldn't fully appreciate when we were together. The admission wasn't what I'd expected. There was no residual bitterness in his voice, no defensiveness, just honest reflection offered without expectation. Thank you for saying that, I replied simply. We've both grown since then. As my driver took me back toward the villa, I watched the scenic coastline unfold with new eyes. The past 2 years had transformed not just my professional standing, but my personal relationships in ways I couldn't have predicted that night at the family dinner. My parents now saw me clearly. My sister had found her own path. Even James had evolved from a painful reminder of being underestimated into a respected colleague with whom I could share a civilized coffee. But perhaps the most significant transformation was internal. I no longer felt compelled to compartmentalize my identity to be one person in the boardroom and another at the family dinner table. I had learned to bring my whole self to every interaction, to stop shrinking to accommodate others' limited perceptions. That night, sitting on my terrace under a canopy of Mediterranean stars, I finally felt the tension of the past 2 years fully release. Not because everything had been resolved perfectly, but because I had stopped seeking external validation for my worth. My success wasn't defined by my family's recognition, my sister's approval, or my ex-boyfriend's regret. It was built on the foundation of my own vision and determination. The next chapter remained unwritten, but for the first time in my adult life, I was truly ready to write it on my own terms. 2 years to the day after my chance coffee with James, in Positano, I found myself once again at my parents' lakeside home for a family dinner. The occasion was ostensibly to celebrate Vanessa's promotion to Director of Operations at Northwestern Memorial, but like most family gatherings now, it had evolved into something more nuanced, a celebration not of individual achievements, but of our collective growth. "Diana, tell everyone about the new pediatric veterinary initiative," my father prompted as we settled around the dining table, now expanded to accommodate our growing circle. I caught my mother's eye and smiled. The days when my father had dismissed my work as that computer thing seemed to belong to another lifetime. "It's still in the development phase," I explained, "but we're creating specialized software for animal hospitals that treat exotic pets and wildlife. The tracking and treatment protocols are completely different from domestic animals." "That's fascinating," said Michael, Vanessa's fiancé, a neurologist whose genuine interest in others made him a welcome addition to our family dynamics. "The computational models must be incredibly complex." "They are. We've brought in specialists from zoos and wildlife preservation groups to consult." My mother passed the serving dishes, her movements relaxed in a way they never used to be during these gatherings. "And how is the Seattle expansion going? Is James still overseeing that region?" I nodded, accepting the roasted vegetables. "He is. In fact, the Pacific Northwest has become our fastest-growing market. The team there just opened our 3rd integrated clinic in Portland." What I didn't mention was that James and I had been meeting for coffee regularly, whenever business brought either of us to the other's city. After our chance encounter in Italy, we'd established a cautious friendship, one based on mutual respect, rather than romantic entanglement. Our past relationship had gradually receded into background context, allowing something new and unexpected to emerge, a genuine appreciation for each other as peers. "Diana's being modest," Travis interjected, scrolling through his phone. "Fortune just listed Horizon as one of the top 10 places to work in healthcare tech, and she made their 40 under 40 list again." "We saw that," my father said proudly, already framed in my office. I laughed, remembering how desperately I'd once craved this kind of recognition from him. Now it arrived freely, almost excessively. My father had become my most enthusiastic cheerleader, sometimes to the point of embarrassment. "Enough about work," my mother declared, signaling the shift to personal territory that had become a comfortable part of our new family culture. "Diana, you haven't told us about your trip to London next month. Is it all business, or will you have some time for pleasure?" There was a time when such a question would have felt like pressure, my mother's subtle way of inquiring about my personal life. Now, it was simply conversation, offered without agenda. Mostly business. "We're finalizing an acquisition of a British veterinary network, but I've added a few days at the end to visit friends." What I didn't share, not yet, was that James would be joining me for those extra days, not as a colleague or even strictly as a friend, but as something new we were both cautiously exploring. Our monthly coffees had gradually evolved into dinners, then weekend hikes, and finally an honest conversation about whether there might be something worth revisiting between us. "Sometimes people meet at the wrong time," he'd said during a walk along Seattle's waterfront. "They're not ready for each other yet." I'd considered this thoughtfully. "And sometimes they need to become different people before they can be right for each other." The transformation had been gradual but profound. James was no longer the man intimidated by my ambition, but someone who admired it, who had developed his own leadership identity parallel to mine. And I was no longer the woman who compartmentalized my life, hiding parts of myself to accommodate others' expectations. As dinner progressed into dessert, I watched my family with quiet appreciation. Vanessa and I now shared career advice rather than rivalry. My parents asked questions about my work and actually listened to the answers. Travis had started a tech-adjacent business of his own, occasionally seeking my counsel on strategy decisions. The dinner that had once exposed every fracture in our family dynamic had ultimately become the catalyst for healing those same fractures. The sister who had stolen my boyfriend at a family dinner had found her own path to success. The boyfriend who had underestimated my ambition had become a valued colleague, and perhaps something more. The parents who had dismissed my work had become its most enthusiastic supporters. And I had learned perhaps the most important lesson of all: that living authentically, refusing to shrink myself to accommodate others' limitations, wasn't just personally fulfilling, it actually created space for everyone around me to grow as well. When my phone chimed with a message from James, "Good luck with family dinner. Remember, you're the CEO of your personal life too," I smiled and silenced the ringer. The boundaries between work and family, once so rigidly maintained, had finally dissolved into something more integrated and authentic, just like me. The London acquisition proved more complex than anticipated, extending my trip by nearly 2 weeks. By the time the contracts were finalized, I was exhausted but satisfied. Horizon's international footprint had expanded significantly, positioning us as a truly global leader in veterinary healthcare technology. James arrived the day after the closing dinner, having arranged his own schedule to align with my extended stay. Seeing him walk through the arrivals gate at Heathrow, confident, relaxed, carrying only a sleek weekender bag, I was struck by how differently I perceived him now compared to our first relationship. "Congratulations on closing the deal," he said as we embraced briefly. "The European team is buzzing about it." "Thank you. It was worth the extra time, but I'm ready for something other than conference rooms and legal documents." I led him toward the waiting car. "I've made exactly 0 tourist stops in 2 weeks here. Then we have some catching up to do." The next 5 days unfolded with deliberate leisure. Morning walks through Hyde Park, afternoons in museums, evenings at tucked-away restaurants recommended by locals. We moved together with an easy rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new, free from the tensions that had characterized our previous time together. On our final evening, dining at a small restaurant overlooking the Thames, James set down his wine glass with uncharacteristic solemnity. "I've been thinking about something, and I'd like your perspective, both professional and personal." "That sounds serious," I replied, curious about his tone. "Seattle has been good for me," he began. "I've grown there, professionally and personally. But there's an opportunity I've been considering, heading up the International Veterinary Standards Committee for Horizon. It would mean relocating to London for at least 2 years. I studied him carefully. That position reports directly to the Chief Medical Officer. It's several levels removed from my direct oversight. I know. That's partly why it's appealing." He met my gaze directly. "If we're going to explore this, I think some professional distance would be healthy." The thoughtfulness of his consideration touched me. The old James might have made this decision unilaterally, or expected me to solve the professional-personal equation for him. This James had clearly reflected on the complexities and arrived at his own solution. "The International Committee would benefit tremendously from your experience," I said, speaking first as CEO. "And personally," I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I think you're right about the professional distance. Whatever happens between us should be separate from our work hierarchy." "So you think I should pursue it?" "I think you should pursue what feels right for your career. And if that aligns with what feels right for us personally, all the better." He reached across the table, taking my hand in his, a gesture both simple and significant. "When did you get so wise about balancing the personal and professional?" "Probably around the time I stopped compartmentalizing every aspect of my life," I replied with a smile. "It turns out integration works as well for living as it does for business models." 2 months later, I stood in Heathrow again, this time seeing James off as he returned to Seattle to wrap up his regional duties before his permanent transfer to London. Our relationship had evolved cautiously but steadily, defined by mutual respect rather than the uneven dynamic of our past. I'll see you in Geneva next month for the healthcare summit, I reminded him as the final boarding call sounded, and I'll be fully transitioned to London by the time you're back for the quarterly executive review. He hesitated, then added, "This feels right, Diana. The timing, the professional boundaries, all of it." I nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. It does. We're different people now. As his plane departed, I didn't feel the anxious attachment I might have expected. Instead, there was a calm certainty that we were both making choices aligned with our authentic selves, professionally and personally. Back in New York, I found an unexpected visitor waiting in my office, Vanessa, elegantly professional in her hospital administration attire, a look of nervous determination on her face. "Surprise," she said, rising from the guest chair as I entered. "I hope it's okay that I stopped by. I had a healthcare compliance conference in the city and thought I'd seize the opportunity." Of course it's okay. I embraced her warmly. "But something tells me this isn't just a social call." She smiled, my directness no longer triggering the defensive reactions of our past. "You know me too well. I actually came with a proposal. Northwestern is implementing a new veterinary partnership program, bringing therapy animals into more hospital departments. We need a robust tracking system for the animals' schedules, training certifications, health records." "And you thought?" "Of Horizon," I finished for her, gesturing for her to continue. "The hospital administration is concerned about regulatory compliance and integration with our existing patient management systems. When they asked if I knew anyone with expertise in both healthcare software and veterinary needs, she shrugged. Who better than my sister? The moment crystallized how thoroughly our relationship had transformed. 3 years ago, Vanessa would never have approached me professionally, seeing it as an admission of my superior position. Now she sat across from me, confident in her own professional identity, seeing our different strengths as complementary, rather than competitive. "I'd be happy to connect you with our healthcare integration team," I offered. "This sounds like exactly the kind of innovative crossover project we're interested in exploring." Later that evening, as I recounted the interaction to James during our nightly video call, his response captured the journey perfectly. "Funny how things come full circle, isn't it? From family drama to family synergy? From competition to collaboration?" I agreed. In every aspect of life. The path from that fateful family dinner to this moment hadn't been linear or predictable. It had required difficult conversations, professional recalibrations, and personal growth from everyone involved. But the view from this vantage point, where professional success and personal fulfillment complemented rather than competed with each other, made every challenging step worthwhile. 3 years after James relocated to London, I found myself, once again at my parents' lakeside home, this time for a milestone celebration, their 40th wedding anniversary. The gathering was larger than our typical family dinners, with extended relatives, longtime friends, and even a few of my father's business associates in attendance. I arrived early to help with preparations, having flown in from London the previous day. My visits to the UK had become increasingly frequent over the past 3 years, initially for Horizon's European operations and gradually for more personal reasons as well. James and I had built something neither of us had anticipated, a relationship, founded on mutual respect and genuine understanding, free from the power imbalances and misconceptions that had doomed our first attempt. "There you are," my mother said, finding me arranging flowers in the sunroom. "I was hoping to catch you alone before everyone arrives." She looked elegant in a silver-blue dress that complemented her now fully gray hair, which she had finally stopped coloring after decades of resistance. The change suited her, one of many small ways she had embraced authenticity in recent years. "Everything looks beautiful, Mom," I said, adjusting a final bloom. 40 years is quite an achievement." "It is," she agreed, sitting on the window. seat and patting the space beside her in invitation. Though I sometimes think we're doing better in years 30 through 40 than we did in the earlier decades. She smiled wryly. Your father and I have learned a few things, albeit rather late. I joined her, curious about her reflective mood. Like what? Like how to actually see the people we love, not just the versions of them we find most convenient. She took my hand, a gesture of affection that had once been rare between us. You taught us that, Diana. When you stopped allowing yourself to be diminished at this dinner table, you changed something fundamental for all of us. The acknowledgement touched me deeply. I wasn't trying to teach anyone anything. I was just finally being honest about who I am. That's precisely why it worked. She squeezed my hand gently. The strongest lessons are lived, not lectured. Watching you stand in your full power, professionally and personally, showed your father and me how much we'd been missing by trying to fit you into our narrow expectations. Through the window, I could see guests beginning to arrive, my father greeting them with uncharacteristic warmth, Vanessa and Michael helping their toddler son navigate the stone path to the house, Travis escorting our elderly aunt from her car. James called this morning, my mother mentioned casually. He wanted to make sure the flowers had arrived. I smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. He's sorry he couldn't be here. The International Veterinary Conference couldn't be rescheduled. We understand. He's been to every family gathering for the past 2 years. He's allowed to miss one. She studied me with knowing eyes. He also asked for my opinion on something rather specific, something about family heirlooms and appropriate timing. My pulse quickened slightly. Did he now? Her smile was quietly delighted. I told him that when it comes to timing, you two have figured out your own unique rhythm. Whatever he's planning, I suspect you're both ready for it. Before I could respond, the patio doors opened as Vanessa entered with her son, Oliver, balanced on her hip. At nearly 2, he was the spitting image of Michael, with the same serious expression and observant eyes. There's my favorite nephew, I greeted him, grateful for the interruption as my mind processed what my mother had implied about James's call. Your only nephew, Vanessa corrected with a laugh, transferring the toddler to my waiting arms. For now, anyway. I raised an eyebrow at her meaningful tone. Vanessa Reeves Goldstein, do you have something to tell us? Her smile broadened as she nodded, one hand moving instinctively to rest on her still flat stomach. 12 weeks yesterday. We wanted to wait until after the anniversary celebration to announce it officially, but I couldn't keep it from you. Any longer? My mother gasped with delight, enveloping Vanessa in a tight embrace while I bounced Oliver on my hip, his small hands patting my cheeks with toddler enthusiasm. Another grandchild, my mother whispered, eyes glistening. What a perfect anniversary gift. The evening unfolded with a warmth that would have seemed impossible to imagine 3 years earlier. My father gave a heartfelt speech about growth and second chances, obliquely acknowledging how much our family dynamic had evolved. Vanessa and I shared knowing glances across the table, our former rivalry transformed into genuine sisterly complicity. Travis announced his engagement to his longtime partner, adding another layer of celebration to the gathering. As dessert was served, my phone discreetly vibrated with a message from James. Video call in 5? Want to wish your parents happy anniversary. I slipped away to my father's study, connecting the call on my tablet. James appeared on screen, his hotel room in Geneva visible in the background, his smile immediate and warm. How's the celebration going? He asked. Beautifully. Mom's thrilled, Dad's emotional but trying to hide it, and Vanessa just told us she's pregnant again. That's wonderful news. And the flowers arrived on time? They're perfect. Mom loved them. I hesitated, then added casually, she mentioned, you called her this morning. His expression flickered with surprise before settling into a resigned smile. Did she tell you what we discussed? she hinted. Something about family heirlooms and timing? James laughed softly. I should have known better than to swear your mother to secrecy, though I suppose it saves me some planning. He reached off camera and returned with a small velvet box, opening it to reveal an elegant emerald ring set in platinum. Not ostentatious, but undeniably striking. I was going to wait until your visit next month, he explained. Had quite an elaborate plan involving that little riverside cafe where we had our first London lunch. But perhaps this moment has its own perfection. My heart raced, but not with uncertainty, with the quiet certainty of recognition. This wasn't the impulsive proposal of young love or the calculated step of a conventional timeline. This was the natural evolution of a relationship built thoughtfully, intentionally, between two people who had grown into their best selves. Diana Reeves, James said, his voice steady across the digital connection. We've taken the most unconventional path to get here. From colleagues to couple to exes to colleagues again, and finally to partners in the truest sense. Would you consider adding one more title to that journey and become my wife? Through the study door, I could hear the sounds of my family celebrating. Laughter, conversation, the clinking of glasses, the background music of lives intertwined. This moment seemed to exist in perfect counterpoint to that painful family dinner years ago. The completion of a circle I hadn't known I was drawing. Yes, I said simply, my smile reflecting his. I would. I do. Later, rejoining the anniversary celebration with news of my own to share, I found myself standing slightly apart, observing my family with the perspective of both distance and deep connection. The sister who had once stolen my boyfriend now approached with genuine joy to hear about my engagement. The parents who had once dismissed my career now celebrated both my professional achievements and personal happiness with equal enthusiasm. And I, who had once compartmentalized every aspect of my identity to fit others' expectations, now stood whole and integrated, CEO, daughter, sister, fiancé, each role strengthening rather than diminishing the others. The journey from that fateful dinner to this celebration hadn't been about revenge or vindication. It had been about growth. Painful, necessary, transformative growth for everyone involved. The final resolution wasn't that I had proven my worth to others, but that I had finally, completely recognized it in myself. My wedding day arrived on a perfect autumn afternoon, the lakeside property transformed with elegant floral arrangements and twinkling lights. As I prepared in my childhood bedroom, now converted to a guest suite, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Confident, serene, complete. A soft knock at the door revealed Vanessa, resplendent in her matron of honor dress, her second pregnancy just beginning to show. "Ready?" she asked, her eyes misty with genuine emotion. "More than I've ever been for anything," I replied truthfully. The ceremony unfolded beneath a canopy of golden leaves, with James waiting at an altar overlooking the lake where our complicated story had begun years ago. My father, walking me down the aisle, whispered words I never expected to hear. "I'm proud of you, Diana, not just for what you've built, but for who you've become." As James and I exchanged vows, promises of partnership, respect, and understanding, I scanned the gathered faces. My mother, dabbing tears with an embroidered handkerchief. Travis and his fiancée, hands intertwined. My executive team, who had become like family. And little Oliver, attempting to eat flower petals until Michael gently intervened. The journey that had begun with humiliation at a family dinner had transformed into a celebration of authentic self-worth and genuine connection. The sister who once took what was mine now stood beside me as my strongest supporter. The parents who once diminished my achievements now championed my whole self. And the man who once underestimated my ambition now embraced it as part of what he loved about me. As James slipped the emerald ring onto my finger, A perfect match to my eyes, he'd said when choosing it. I realized that the most powerful statement I'd ever made wasn't leaving that painful dinner years ago. It was returning, standing in my truth, and allowing relationships to rebuild around my authentic self. Some call it karma, others divine timing. I call it coming full circle, returning not to where you began, but to where you were always meant to be. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more empowering content about setting boundaries, recognizing your worth, and finding success on your own terms. New inspirational stories posted weekly.